Hey, it's Andrew Downs. I'm proud to support Three Beards Media, and I would love to work with you. If you need merchandise for your company, organization, band, softball team, whatever, I can help. From name brand apparel to promotional items, large orders or small, online stores, and more, I can help your brand stand out. AKC Marketing is local, based in Johnston, and we are an employee-owned business, so our costs are low and our turnaround times are fast. But most importantly, we give you personal service to make sure you get exactly what you're looking for. Email me at andrew@akcmarketing.com or find me on social media, and let's make some cool stuff together. Now sit back and enjoy this Three Beards Media podcast.
This Three Beards Media podcast may contain mature themes, and if you're not down with that, we got 3 words for you. Like the podcast. Nailed it!
Would you like to sample some of my nuts?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Old Man Strength, brought to you by Greenberry Realty, Revelton Distilling Company, and Wintrust Mortgage. Kyle Lehman, live from the AKC Andrew Downs Studios. I am your host, Chris Shipley, as always, joined by my co-host, Aaron Wall. Aaron, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good. I'm waiting for the inevitable soreness to kick in tomorrow from the going back to yoga for the first time in a few months, because I quit going because it was on Saturday mornings during the football season, so I could watch all the football games, because it's at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I'm on the West Coast, so games start at 9 o'clock in the morning, and well, priorities. But I went back yesterday, and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be sore in the calf cow downward dog and every other yoga pose position you can think of.
I think I did yoga once when like the Wii Fit came out and they had the yoga program on there, and I did yoga on the Wii, I think. I'm not sure that counts though.
I thought it helped. I did it last year. I actually thought it actually really helped my golf game, because I was able to turn better,
sure.
Be looser. So I don't hate it. It's something I can do with my wife when we go together, and yeah, it works out all right. But and it's a good way to try to lose a little weight, which you're going to be doing soon. Which hopefully super excited to track your progress.
Hopefully, yeah. So part of the we're doing a little branch off of the Old Man Strength. I'm doing an Old Man Strength fitness challenge starting tomorrow. Actually, is Friends and Family Week at the Farrell's FXB Southside and EP True Parkway locations. So I'm going to the Southside one for a week, and then Saturday on the 11th is my orientation where I do all my testing. So I apparently have to do sit-ups and stretches and do these measurements. I'm hoping that I'm going to get out of having to run the mile, because I don't really want to do that. And then I start the 10-week challenge to see if I can get slimmed down here. Like I said, I lost close to 50 pounds in 2024. And now that I've got a good plan in place for eating and things like that, it's time to kind of bump up the workouts. I did Farrell's for 4 years, from 2017 to 2021. So I'm familiar with the program. So I'm a little nervous about going back. The last time I was there and the last time I did the 10-week challenge, I hated the mile, and they asked me after I got done if I wanted to do the year challenge, and I asked what that consisted of, and they were like, well, every 10-week challenge you have to do the testing, and I said, does that mean I have to run the mile again? And they were like, yeah, and I said, I'm out, not doing that. Said I'm building this body for power, not for speed. I want no part of that. So I'm hoping that Saturday I can go, can we just skip the mile and just assume that I'm not going to be able to, that I'll shave a couple minutes off and then we'll just call it good, but probably not.
You got to tell them what I tell them, that if you see me running, you should also run, because something terrible is happening behind me.
Exactly. I got too much stuff like flying around, and it's not a good look for anybody. Nobody wants to see it. So
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I'm super excited, and if you guys are interested, you can follow my progress on the Three Beards Facebook and YouTube channel. I'll go live a couple times and then do weekly updates and stuff like that. So we'll see what happens. But shout out to Farrell's Southside and EP True for letting me participate. And if you're interested, join their club. They do a great job over there. So
Not a sponsor, but you could be Farrell's if you're listening.
that's right. Well, they're sponsoring. They're letting me do this challenge for free, so they're technically.
Oh, okay, then sponsor.
That's right. So, all right. Well, let's go ahead and get our guest brought in here. I kind of met this gentleman through my main job, working on some projects for the company that I work for, and of course, if anybody follows their social media and their store, they know what great content they have and what great products they have. So I'm super excited to welcome Mike Draper, owner, founder of Raygun. Mike, thanks for joining us tonight.
Ooh, thanks for having me tonight.
Yeah, I know it was a little bit of touch and go. We had to go back and forth on some dates, but we finally got you locked down. You're a busy guy. So
well, yeah, I don't know. It's just the end of the year, sometimes busy for retail.
Yeah, I can't imagine why, right?
And
yeah.
Like kids and stuff. So it's like always, I don't know. There's always something going on.
Well, I give you a brief introduction, but as we talked a little bit before we started the pod here, we kind of like to start begin. It's always cliche say, tell us about your childhood, but why don't you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and what it was like growing up there?
Yeah. So, I mean, to start with kind of like who I am and why anybody would be interested, I am the founder and owner of Raygun, which has been called the greatest store in the universe by Raygun, which is a real honor. So we're headquartered from East 5th and Grand in Des Moines, but we have 10 stores. So there's 6 in Iowa, Chicago, KC, Omaha, Lincoln, and we do all of our screen printing and design in-house. So we have a printing and distribution facility in like south of downtown Des Moines. And so it's around like an $8 million-ish company. There's 100 or so people who work there. But I sit day to day about 6 blocks from where I was born at Lutheran Hospital in Des Moines. So geographically, I have not come very far in life. I've only made it like half a mile. And there's a funeral home between me and the hospital, Hamilton's on East 6th. So I could go cradle to grave in one tiny stretch of the east side of Des Moines. But I grew up out in Van Meter, so just a little bit west of Des Moines. I was there K through 12, so graduated with like 31 kids, I think. We were class A, so that like tiny. But I mean, we would play some schools even smaller than us. So I mean, our football team, I think every guy but 3 in the whole high school played football. So we had like 52 guys on the football team, enough for like freshman JV team. We always did well. We played, I mean, one town, Russell, we played was still like just by itself. And there were 18 guys in the entire high school. I mean, just tiny. Like a lot of the towns we would play have since been consolidated. But so grew up right outside Des Moines. My parents like commuted into Des Moines. Graduated. My main goal was to leave Iowa, which I found out was easier to accomplish than I had anticipated. There are several clearly marked exits. If you drive like 3.5 hours in literally any direction, you've left Iowa. It's like mission accomplished. I went and studied at like the University of Pennsylvania for 4 years, and then decided to move back and start the store. So that's kind of like brief.
Sure.
Also, yeah, I mean, I'm like 42 now, so I've been doing the company for like 20 years, which is wild. So I care a lot more about my fiber intake than I did even 5 years ago. We could talk about fiber for the rest of the time. Like we could just run down percentage, how many grams you're supposed to get per day. I mean, believe it or not.
I mean, not gonna lie, it's on my app.
I know most people not coming close to how much. I mean, if you read how much fiber you need in a day, then you start like looking at dried apricots and stuff like that. And you're like 18%. Like, damn, you got to eat a lot of this type of stuff to get enough fiber.
I'm currently sitting at 16 grams of fiber today out of the 29 that I'm supposed to have. So, and it's 8 o'clock. So I don't think I'm going to make it.
Not even close. Yeah, you're
No.
gonna have to.
I put chickpeas in homemade chicken noodle soup the other day, and my wife was like, "Why?" I said, "Fiber."
Yeah,
You know,
pumpkin seeds.
protein
Those
and
pumpkin
fiber.
seeds are like sky high. Yeah, I mean, if you just poured yourself a pint of pumpkin seeds right now and started chewing, you'd be able to get there by the end of the show.
That doesn't seem like a good time. That doesn't seem like it's worth living
Yeah,
for,
well,
to be honest with you. To be 100% honest with you. So you always wanted to get out of Iowa. Tell us why. I mean, I think when you're younger, you don't see what Iowa brings. But everybody, what are your reasons for wanting to get out of Iowa when you were younger?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think you in general, you kind of grow up somewhere, and it's you want to. I mean, especially for me, you kind of grow up thinking like, oh, everybody like out east is going to be much like smarter. Schools are going to be more fun, that type of thing. So I applied to like competitive schools out east, got into the University of Pennsylvania, decided to go, and it was a learning experience to say the least. Not necessarily for the education. You think it's going to be for the education, but then I think going to any Ivy League school for at least liberal arts, not like a real degree like engineering or science or stuff where like the answers matter. Liberal arts is kind of like, what do you think about it? Whereas
I
like,
have one of those degrees, so I get it.
Whereas I think like, engineering, science, it's like, well, you kind of want the person who has like the actual right answer, not what they thought caused the French Revolution. It's like, here's what I think caused your appendix to burst. And it's like, oh, that's a good theory. Oh shit, I'm cured now. And so you realize that it's kind of like that quote from Good Will Hunting that he says to the guys at like the Harvard bar, where he's like, one day you're going to wake up and realize you spent $130,000 on an education you could have gotten in $10 worth of late fees from the public library. And you are like, yeah, this is kind of like that. I'm paying money. My parents are paying money for me to like read books. But the biggest education I thought was growing up here. I was like, well, I just want to make a lot of money. That was kind of my marker for success. And you assumed you're like, oh, if you make a lot of money, you are obviously like pretty intelligent, or I don't know. That's kind of like how you break it down. And it's like somebody's worth is tied up in money. And then you get to a place like Penn, which is, Wharton school. So finance, all that stuff is there. Ivanka Trump was my year. Don went there. His son went there. I mean, just, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting some dickhead. And, you just realize like, oh no, you make a bunch of money not by being particularly talented, but by just going into a field that siphons off a small percentage from huge transactions. So corporate law, corporate consulting, corporate banking, you just go and take 3% of that. Fast forward to what I do at Raygun, I'm taking 3% of all the transactions, but they're $35 transactions. If I were doing $36 million transactions, $35 billion transactions, and taking 3%, you're doing better. So the handiest thing about Penn was that it totally removed the mystery out of life. You kind of realized like, oh, there is no skill set that I don't have that I could not succeed in one of those three fields: corporate law, corporate consulting, corporate banking. But I kind of realized I didn't want to do any of those things. So then you're faced with a different conundrum. You're like, okay, well, so making money is kind of important, but apparently not the most important thing to me. And I think if I hadn't gone, I don't know if I would have that realization to be so inside the oracle, and also to be kind of let down by the other kids. Like, I got there and they said, oh, you were in the upper echelon. Like when you get this convocation, and the person that's speaking to us, like all the freshmen, is like, you are in the upper echelon of American academia. And it kind of made me chuckle because I spent part of my days at Central Academy in Des Moines, which was, like the who's who of the entire Des Moines area when I got there. And it made me laugh because I'm like, oh shit, I was in like the bottom half of my class at Central Academy, and most of those kids went to Iowa State. So I don't think we're like pulling from the best of the best. I think it's like a self-selecting group. And you just see this overflowing confidence that kids from the Northeast had that was like totally unwarranted. It was the first place I had ever lived where somebody in a class would extrapolate on a book they hadn't read. I mean, the hubris is just mind-boggling. You're like, you didn't read the book, and yet you formed an opinion of it enough to say that opinion out loud. The fuck are you doing? Like, nobody in Iowa would have done it. Would just been like pretend you aren't in the class. Hope
Right.
nobody calls on you, but you're not going to be like, excuse me, you know what I thought about the book? And so it was just eye-opening across the board, and like raised my confidence level a little bit in terms of what I was doing, but also like threw everything wide open. Like, it was no longer go to Ivy League school, get job, make money. The track was a lot more wide open, and I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. And so you started looking at the entire world differently. And then I graduated and started selling t-shirts.
You know, it's funny.
It's like a bizarre, seems like a left-hand turn, but
it's funny that you say that, and you think you go to college, you're going to make money and you become rich or whatever. I remember leaving for college, and I told my dad I was going to major in business, and I was going to I was going to get a great job, and same thing, and I'm going to be rich. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, why don't you go to college and learn how to run a business, and then I'll show you how to make money.
there you go.
That was his philosophy. And I was like, and that came from a guy that had an 8th grade education and somehow put kids through college and, accomplished everything that he accomplished. And that was immediately, I was like, okay, well, maybe I don't know everything, and maybe I'll learn some different things up there. But it's an interesting perspective when you think about it that way.
Yeah. I mean, it was like, for me, I graduated, so it's not like I dropped out or anything. But I applied my senior year for this like competitive fellowship to go study abroad, which was really just to go live with my girlfriend who I'd met.
We want to hear about that.
Yeah. So I got a scholarship to go abroad my junior year, met a girl over there, and I was going to graduate. And there was this other scholarship, and they're like, yeah, if you get it, it pays everything. So tuition, room, board, all that stuff. And I was like, well, I'll just go to the same school I was at. We can live together. And I didn't get it, which was a surprise. If you're somebody who has like the entrepreneurial spirit, you're kind of like long on confidence and short on practical planning. So at no point did I think I would not get this. I'm like, wow, I'm as surprised as you are. And I had not taken like my GREs. I hadn't taken my LSATs. I hadn't applied for any jobs because I wasn't that interested in doing anything. I don't know. I think that was like my own body's way of saying like, oh, you're not actually like cut out for what a degree from this school will actually provide of value. And so I was kind of reevaluating my entire future. And a friend said, oh, we should just sell that Not Penn State t-shirt on campus. And this was a shirt that my freshman year, there was a store that sold Not Penn State t-shirts. And it was the first shirt I ever bought for Penn, because it's obviously like if you went to Penn, you already didn't get into Yale or Princeton. And if you're at an Ivy League school, you're only there because you want adulation from total strangers on how smart you are. It's not like the books are better. They don't actually tell you who started the First World War. And then they're like, don't tell the state school kids. But so to have your Ivy League school regularly confused with like a subpar Big Ten school is like a real kick in the nuts.
Subpar Big
So you buy like I had this Not Penn State t-shirt. Pretty much everybody my freshman year had it. And then that store went out of business my sophomore year. So by my senior year, like all the seniors have Not Penn State t-shirts. And whenever you wore it around campus, you would get stopped like 5-6 times. And they were like, where'd you get that shirt? And you're like, it's the store. They went out of business. It's like, oh, if somebody had those, I'd buy it. And you're like, yeah, they don't, leave me alone. I got to go win this fellowship. And so my friend was like, oh, we should like just take that to a screen printer and sell them on campus. So we took that shirt to a screen printer, had 100 of them made, and then we stood in the middle of campus and sold t-shirts, and we sold all 100 of them. We got another 100, kept selling them. The thing we heard the most was from other seniors being like, oh my God, my friends and I had this exact same idea. I'm always like blown away by the idea of like, whenever you think about somebody who's, people often say like, oh, you're self-made. Like, it's just you. I'm the only owner of the store. And it's like, oh, the idea to start selling t-shirts wasn't even my idea. It was like my friend's idea. Our first design wasn't even our design. It was like this other t-shirt. And so it's not like it was born out of this grand vision for it's going to go from A to B to C. It's like got the whole thing mapped out. And it's like, we're going to use one font. it was just, you kind of pass from what I call, audience member to participant. Like as soon as you started selling, like that was the biggest difference in my life, was you walk from the stands onto the field and you're like, oh, well, now I'm playing. And it's like, yeah, in the words of Young MC, do your thing, make the telephone ring. It's like, yeah, you're not in school anymore. There is like no safety net. Go out there, make money appear out of thin air. And I spent like 6 months traveling around out east. I would stay with friends. I would stand on particularly busy street corners and college campuses and just sell t-shirts. So I'd go to like Union Square, Times Square, New York, NYU, Columbia, like Harvard, Yale, Brown. And I would just stand there for 5-6 hours a day selling t-shirts out of a bag to people. And then I would go stay with friends at night. So I had no like fixed address. I did that for like several months and then decided to move back to Des Moines in like January of 2005. A friend, I was talking about like, I want to start my own shop. I should like start screen printing myself. Like other people were screen printing for stuff. And it was, your average person is totally unreliable. Like working with other screen printers, other store owners, other humans. I was like, shit, I don't even know how to screen print, but I could probably do it better than most of the idiots who are running screen printing shops. Because I'm like the Patrick Mahomes of replying to emails and showing up regularly. It's like, if you need somebody to be there and do the bare minimum, this is your guy. And a friend of mine from Des Moines who was living in New York at the time was like, oh, you know what you should do? You should like move back and put your store like on the east side. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah, my dad said they're like redoing buildings by the Capitol and they're like opening little stores there. And you get some advice at the right place at the right time. And it's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to go do that. And so move back home, literally back into my old bunk bed. Started screen printing in like my parents' basement. A buddy of mine from Van Meter, his dad had a screen printing shop in a pole barn behind his house. And so I learned how to screen print from him, got my own equipment, opened the store in 2005. I was the only employee for 2 years, probably like 2005, 2006, 2007, started hiring some people. We didn't open our second store until 2009. Even by then there were only like 4 full-time people. And I think about it now, it's one of those things where people now are like, oh, I'd love to have your job. And you're like, yeah, no shit. It's like my job. No. It's like, I get paid plenty. I do whatever I want. You have access to credit, like on and on and on. Back then, I couldn't give away partial ownership of Raygun. Like a buddy from high school, I was like, hey, you want to come join the company? He's like, I got a pretty good thing going here at Fairway. It's like, oh, damn. Like, I had gone from absolute like cock of the walk in Van Meter to like selling t-shirts. And pretty much everybody with a steady job was like, yeah, I don't know. And I think about that now that I have like kids and stuff, is that the number one question literally anybody who knew me in high school asked is like, oh my God, what do your parents think about this? So it seemed like I had cratered almost, where I'd moved. I'm back in Des Moines, like where I started, only seemingly below where I'd started. I'm now like selling inexpensive goods out of a shop. People must have been like, and he had so much potential.
My question totally was going to be close to that. I remember I had to leave school. I had to leave Iowa State for grades at one point. I've told this story before. And I decided in a last ditch effort, I was going to change my major to leisure studies. And I called my old man and said, I'm going to change my major to leisure studies. And he's all sympathetic on the phone. Well, what is that? And I'm explaining this whole bullshit thing that I think I'm fooling him on. And we get off the phone, and later I found out that he turned around and told my mom, he said, I'll be damned if I'm going to pay $5,000 a semester so he can be fucking leisure. He can do that for free at home. Fuck that. So my question is you have a degree from Penn and you come back to your parents' house and say, hey, I want to make screenshot. I want to make t-shirts. What's the reaction to that?
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, like if my parents had an opinion, they didn't really share it with me. Which I think is one of the handier things you could do as a parent, is to like, but I think you can kind of suss out. I mean, it seems like, this total left turn, but at the same time, like when I was in high school, I did movie and music reviews for City View. So when City View was still an alt weekly, I would interview bands, go to movies, like write about stuff, go to concerts. And when I was at Penn, I played in a bunch of bands. I wrote all the time. I entered a film festival when I was in Scotland. So I was always doing these like creative enterprises. And I think I just explained it to them as like, oh, t-shirts aren't necessarily my passion. This is just a creative vehicle that I can monetize. And that's been like the driving force behind the company, which is why, since we've kind of gotten up and running, it's like we've done all sorts of stuff. We've written like 4 books, one technically a bestseller. We've written a play based off the store, like produced that with Scott Sipker, the Iowa Nice Guy. And so we've done so many other like projects because the store has always been this like creative vehicle. But it's hard to get around that as like a parent to know that you've like set yourself, like all you're doing is like building an environment. Like you're essentially assigned these tiny roommates that you're in charge of, and you can fuck it up. Certainly, like ignore them, beat them, molest them. There's ways that you could, destroy your kids' lives on purpose. But for the most part, they are kind of their own person. And your job is to build like an environment and expose them to things, and then see kind of like what they're interested in and then like trust them. One of like my favorite stories is this woman was driving across country with her daughter from like Boston to LA, and they had to go to Minneapolis. And so they decided to go from Minneapolis down to Des Moines specifically to meet me. She was like a fan of the store from a distance, and her daughter was just starting college, and she wanted her daughter to meet me as like an inspirational business person. I don't know. So I thought that was like pretty wild. We met, and then she asked me like how I started the store, and I was talking to her daughter about it. And I was like, yeah, so I graduated from Penn and I just started selling t-shirts on the street. And her mom, like instinctively, without even really thinking, she's like, well, I don't know if I want you doing that when you graduate, to her daughter. And you're like, oh, but keep in mind, like, you are here just to meet me. How I became me is starting from where I started. But you stop yourself. Like it's that, Warren Buffett thing of like, give your kids enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing. Like you don't want to smother them with, advice or money or just anything to the point where they're like stifled. And it's this tough balance to know, what to give the, education is Latin meaning to draw forth from within, which I always try to keep in mind. It's like, oh no, you're not being like stuffed with knowledge like Rocko's Modern Life, where they're like, it's the idea that you just want to be exposed to things, and then what your interests will kind of reveal themselves from there.
Chris, I got to think that the difference between Mike's situation of coming home and your situation coming home, in all reality, is that Mike had kind of a plan, right? He had been out in the world.
I had no plan.
Selling t-shirts, right. And he came back with a plan to start a shop and do this and learn this. And that's a lot more easy for a parent to accept. Oh, my kid has a plan. We're willing to help. You were just being a lazy piece of shit.
And also my dad knew that I was full of shit. So that's correct.
Yeah, and I think it's good. I mean, and that was kind of the one thing, that Penn was, it was good to be in this like ultra competitive environment. Because you did start thinking in terms of like, 5-year plan. You got asked all the time, like, where are you going to be in 5 years? And it was like a serious question. Like they expected you to be like, oh, I've got this internship this summer and that's going to set me up for this. I'm going to get this job. Then this is when I'm going to get my MBA. And so there is sometimes like a benefit to that, but it's like anything. There's pros and cons to stuff. So there's a pro to, thinking in a regimented way and competing against other people. The con is that you start thinking in too regimented of a way and you're just obsessed with the competition. You're competing for things that you don't even want the prize anymore. You're happy when you've defeated the other kids at Penn and achieved this goal. And then it's like, oh, I didn't even know what I was winning. And you're like, I didn't even want this thing, but I feel glad that I'm depriving all these other assholes of it.
And then there's the stereotypical reaction, like from movies and TV that you see, of the people who don't get those things and just collapse, right? Because they have this plan and then the plan doesn't go to plan and they don't know what to do.
Yeah, I mean, and for me,
no flexibility in their thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I remember a guy from my like fraternity one night, he was like smoking, and I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, just reevaluating my entire future. And I was like, Jesus. And he's like, yeah, I just like failed my real estate exam. I was like, who gives a shit? And he's like, well, my major is real estate. And you're like, oh, bummer. It's like, well, yeah, you may want to. And when I got rejected for that fellowship, I was literally like, oh, damn, like, what am I going to do? And it's like the only letter I've ever kept. It's like hung up in the store. And you're like, oh, this was the single greatest thing to have ever happened to me. And it is hard to tell people, people say it all the time. It becomes so like everything has a silver lining, or, what's that old adage? Like when God rejects you for a competitive fellowship, he opens up a t-shirt shop. But it really is like, oh man, it never occurred to me that this was like the single greatest thing. And it also is kind of wild because at the same time that you don't want to like smother your kids, you do want to look for ways to like steer them a little bit. Like I think to myself, all right, I was 21 applying for a competitive fellowship to go get a master's degree in international relations. And I ended up like selling t-shirts, which was like opened up it was everything I wanted to do essentially in life. But again, I started by thinking I wanted to go to get a master's in international relations. It blows my fucking mind how little I knew about myself at age 21. Like just, you're almost totally unable to step back and like assess your own strengths and what you want to do. And you're really just like living off of what's important to everybody else. And so for me, it was like, oh, well, people seem impressed that I'm at like an Ivy League school, so I'm kicking ass. And then it's like, oh, people seem impressed that people win this fellowship, so I'm going to go do that. And it was weird because I was never really like, I didn't realize how much I hated school until I stopped going. You're like, oh yeah, that fucking sucked. But you kind of thought to yourself, oh, I guess this is what life is. Like do something that you don't enjoy, but that other people seem to put a value in. And then I guess one day you die. It's like, it's in the worlds of Coolio, life is a bitch, and then you die. Still trying to get a piece of that apple pie.
I always joke and say I graduated with a political science degree. Then I worked in IT for 20 years, and now I'm in marketing. So I'm not sure but it's funny that in 20 some years, 30 some years, at one point I thought this is what I wanted to do with my life, and it's not even close. Like it's not even close.
Yeah, I mean, I just lucked out in that it happened to me kind of like early. And there was just a few of these like inflection points where the right thing happens. And it's hard for me to get, too hung up on like other people's projects or too critical of other people's projects. Cause it's like, everything is just work and circumstance. And there were plenty of points like before I started the company that if it had gone differently, I wouldn't have started it. And then even having run the company, there were plenty of points where we, almost ran out of money or it wouldn't have worked out. And that could have been the end of it. And people would have said like, oh yeah, like the kind of funny Des Moines t-shirt thing. Like, yeah, I tried that. And I guess nobody was really into it and it didn't work out. And so, on the one hand, you work at what you can control and you don't worry about what you can't control a little bit. But it's frustrating for people to chalk so much up to luck. They want to think of themselves as like, oh, I'm way up here and everybody else is way down here. When really like the variation is like so small. And it's just sometimes it's like a protractor where it's like, 1% difference at a certain point. But then you spread that out over years and it's just like compounding interest. And then you're way up here and somebody else is there. But it's like where they started is just kind of a wild. Like one insane segue is like the buddy of mine who taught me how to screen print. He was 2 years ahead of me at Van Meter. And we were like pretty good friends, but like had other friends in common. I mean, it's obviously there's 100 people in the entire high school. So you're kind of friends with everybody, everybody fairly well. And I know he had kind of like stuff hadn't gone so great for him, kind of post, like whatever. We were printing shirts together for like a few months. And then a buddy of mine who lives next door to my parents now was like over at my house hanging out. And he's just like, oh, check this out. And he showed me like a mugshot of somebody. And I was like, who's that? He's like, you know who that is? I was like, oh, shit. And it was like the guy who taught me how to screen print was like arrested for his third time for like, meth possession, disorderly conduct. And he's like, semi-homeless now. It's just kind of this crazy. I mean, if you were going to write it as like your typical Iowa drama, it would be almost too over the top to be like, and then the other guy gets hooked on meth. When it's really like, my God, like there was a time when we were almost indiscernible, like two college graduates interested in art, both doing screen printing, both from the same town, both from similar families, both friends. And so there are certain circumstances that are like, totally out of your control, whether it's, like mental health, addiction, all of that stuff. And the handy thing about having been tethered to like this little town is that you're really able to see, man, the difference between people at the granular level is like not very much. I mean, and there are certain things where it's like, oh, a chemical composition, like just this way in this brain sends that life over here. And this one sends that life over there.
Yeah. I want to give it a quick break from a couple of our sponsors. And then when we come back, Mike, I want to ask about your creativeness, where you're getting all these ideas. Are you still part of the creative process now that you're running the company and things like that? So I want to lean more into the creative aspects of Raygun when we come back. Let's get a word from Revelton Distilling Company and Greenberry Realty, and then we'll be back with Mike Draper.
Making great tasting bourbon requires the perfect combination of ingredients, conditions, and time. The longer it rests, the better it tastes. Revelton Distillery's new single barrel bourbon is made from 80% corn, sourced 100% from Iowa farmers. And unlike mass-produced bourbons, each barrel of Revelton's single barrel bourbon is unique, proofed on when it tastes best. As they like to say, it'll be ready when it's ready. And to ensure the highest standards of quality and flavor, owners Rob and Christy Taylor oversee the production and bottling. Every single barrel. Iowa born, Iowa aged, Iowa bottled. Try the new single barrel bourbon from Iowa's own Revelton Distillery. ReveltonDistillery.com.
When energy meets precision, anything is possible.
I'm Carter Hawley, the Chief Energy Officer of the Iowa State Cyclones. I'm full of energy on and off the court, but nothing gives me more energy than helping families find their dream home. And that's where Green Beret Realty comes in. They're more than just realtors. They're a team dedicated to getting things right for you and your family, just like we get it right on the court.
No basket. Fouls on the floor before the shot. Out of bounds.
Come on! Can you believe that? You can't take that away from me.
That call was absolutely terrible. Are you guys cautiously trying to be this bad? I mean, does your mom not love you?
Have you seen how old my partner is? My back hurts already from carrying him all night. And I've heard enough out of you.
So you're gone. Fine.
Jim, are you blind? Basket's good. We've got a three-pointer. Sometimes it takes a team to get the call right. And when you're buying a home, you want a team that makes all the right calls. That is Green Beret Realty. And here's the best part. When you buy or sell a home through Dan at Green Beret Realty and mention this ad, he'll make a donation to the We Will Collective, helping student athletes like me thrive on and off the court.
That call's so easy, even we can make it.
Green Beret Realty, because getting the call right means everything.
All right, and we're back with Mike Draper from Raygun, my partner Aaron. Mike, you have some pretty clever shirts, some pretty clever things. I immediately bought the T-shirt after the Republican debate last year when Chris Christie made the comment that Joe Biden was sleeping with the head of the teachers union. And I was in Orlando when I saw it pop up in my feeds, and I bought it. And I looked at my wife and said, "I bought this shirt," and she's like, "Why would you buy that?" I was like, "Because it's the greatest thing ever."
Like, I'm sleeping with a member of the teachers union.
So, and she rolls her eyes every time I wear it. But I guess 2 questions. Where do you, at the beginning, where were you coming up with your creativeness about that? And I'd love to know your reasoning behind leaning so far into your politics and where you stand when it comes to Raygun.
Yeah, I mean, we get a lot of, I don't know. We do a lot of stuff about like current events. And so whether it's like sports, politics, the weather, all that. And so the politics kind of like enters into it. And sometimes people will be like, "Oh, I liked it when you just did shirts about sports." And you're like, "Well, actually, we did shirts about politics before we did shirts about sports." So I don't know how long you've been involved in the company. But it started as more political when I very first started. Like Jon Stewart for President was one of our first shirts. You know, we sold in a lot of like punk rock shops and stuff like that. Most of the music I was into was like 90s punk rock, Rage Against the Machine, 1 Minute Silence. So there was like a heavy political bent to everything I was into, like politics, personally, elections, art, everything. And so that's always kind of been this like thread through it. And in terms of, you know, the process now, sometimes people are like, "Oh, did you like it? Do you like it? Did you like it more when it was just you?" I was like, "No, that sucked. Like I had to do everything. Like I barely did design. Like we're spending time like cleaning, printing, ringing up sales." I mean, if you want to be a designer, the worst thing you can do is to like start a design firm sometimes, because then you're working on sales, you're in pitch meetings, you're tracking down invoices, you're requesting payment. It's just on and on and on. I do so much more design and creative stuff now than I did in the beginning, because now I actually have like a machine to distribute things. And we have like different managers and different directors that handle like different departments of the company. So when we set up a store in Lincoln this last year, I went to Lincoln to kind of like check out the like city, went back to look at a space, signed a lease. And then the next time I was back in Lincoln was when the store was open. So it's not like I'm there, hanging lights or anything. I do kind of what I do, which is the creative side. So I run the creative team. There are 2 other full-time designers, but design we use loosely. Everything's one font, 3 or 4 templates. You design 75% of our stuff in Microsoft Word. So we're not really pushing the boundaries of design. We're working within like this brand. We could obviously design in a more complicated way, but it's kind of like the white stripes theory of design, where we like strip it way down and say, all right, these are the only tools we're going to work with. Let's think creatively within those tools. But then we connect all the staff through Slack. And so every store manager, we have all these channels, and it's the stores, it's design ideas. So managers will post ideas, people will post news articles. The design team, kind of the creative group, we're more like air traffic controllers than designers. You take all this information, like here's what happened yesterday, here's what's happening this week, here was so-and-so's idea, here's this thing from social media. And then it's us deciding what we're going to make into product versus what's going to be a post, how fast we want to do it, how to move the schedule. And we have this giant sheet that we work on, and it's always rotating through. And there's some things that you look forward to, the most recent example is obviously like the Pop-Tarts Bowl was on like a Saturday night. You don't know what's going to happen. We never want to jinx the game by printing stuff ahead of time, but we obviously have like some designs ready. And so you wait and see, Iowa State wins. We put out our design that we had ready, but then we came up with like 2 designs just in like chit chat from after the game. I think like Matt Campbell's quote was like, Ames isn't for everybody, but it's a special place. And so we're like, put that on a shirt. So you just like stick that up, post it right away. There was one other idea that came like out of the game too, from the post response. And so those are the types of things where we're more like a media company dressed up as a t-shirt shop than we are just traditional t-shirt shop. It's not, we sell content, t-shirts just happen to be the vehicle for that content. So it's a lot of just like on the fly decisions. It's some planning, it's some on the fly decisions, and just kind of like steadily churning out stuff.
So I want to back up and ask you a question. And to kind of go back to what you're talking about when you were flying solo, running the company, and how you didn't get as much time to do the design and do all of that kind of stuff. Like when you put something out, if it became really popular, like how, like you had to be printing all the time just to keep up at points. Like, I mean, so I guess the question is there a specific instance of a shirt that kind of happened to you and ate just a really long amount of time, which really was great for the business because you were selling, but also didn't allow then to push forward as much as you might have liked?
I mean, the sales side of it would have been good. We had such a small footprint in the very beginning with just one store in Des Moines in a neighborhood that was like up and coming. And then the website was still pretty small compared to what it could be. I mean, there was just, looking back on it, I could have applied more. If I had known what I was doing, we could have like scaled it up faster. It was really just to supplement our income. We were always doing custom printing. And so you take on these custom printing jobs, and we worked with a lot of bands. We did all the printing for like the Nadas and the Envy Corps. And so you would get these jobs, which were lower margin, but just were guaranteed and would pay the bills. And so, I would be there like printing in the evening. I would come in the morning. But I mean, it was, an absolute grind in that I would get in at like 7 in the morning and I would be there until 7 at night. And you would do that like 6 days a week minimum. Like I was open Monday through Saturday and then 7 days a week, like during the holidays. And you would get in early to like print, knowing that you were going to be like stopped printing if somebody dropped by the store, et cetera, et cetera. So it is, I mean, just it's hard to kind of describe to people. The only thing I found similar to, running the company is like parenting. And like if you've managed a company before or you managed part of a company before, it's kind of like having a nanny gig where you're really familiar with kids, all the basics, but there is this like move from manager to owner that is similar from like nannying to parenting. Just all the dynamics are a little bit different, even if some of the nuts and bolts are the same. And so it was just, I don't know. It's hard to like explain to people in the beginning, like the like loneliness, monotony, work, difficulty of it. I mean, I've always told people like, oh, if you like vacations and hobbies and lunch, don't start a business. And you'll have people who are like, I'm going to start a company. You're like, for what? And they're like, to like make my own hours and the money. And it's like, don't do that. Like you will work more and make less doing this than almost any other field. You have to do it because you want to do. I mean, there has to be something supplying you besides just the money part of it.
Yeah, I can see that. I worked with a guy one time and he had a philosophy that he had 40 hours a week he was willing to sell. And sometimes that's okay. Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough now because you realize like growing the business is a part-time job on top of running the business. Like
yeah,
getting a business off the ground is difficult. Keeping it running is even harder than that. Scaling it up is like even harder than that. I mean, it's like Mario, where like every level just gets like faster and more difficult. And it's why you don't see a lot of them. But, Raygun is a bit of an optical illusion. And you walk around, it's pop art, everybody's got funny ideas for t-shirts. The stuff is funny because it's relatable. And if it's relatable, it means other people have had similar ideas. So anybody can have a funny idea for a shirt. The design isn't too tough. Selling things isn't particularly difficult, like the point of sale software. Shipping things isn't particularly difficult. None of the tasks that we do in a given day are really that hard. But doing them over and over thousands of times every day in 11 different locations, year in and year out, that's where it gets difficult. And so it's this weird, you look at it and on the surface, you're like, it doesn't seem that hard. But then you take a step back and you don't see other places like it. You're like, well, How many clothing brands out of Des Moines have scaled up to 10 stores in the last 20 years?
Right.
One.
Yeah.
But like literally, it's like our business model's like on the floor. You can just copy it. But it's obviously there's something that's more difficult than meets the eye. And part of it is just the circumstance. It's that it's not just one game. It's you're playing over and over and over. It's like, oh, you make it through year 1. Well, now you got to level up at year 2. At year 5, you have to slightly reinvent yourself. Year 10, same reinvention. Year 15, same thing. And so it's not just one idea and you coast. It's like idea after idea after idea.
We're going to switch gears a little bit. We're going to try to have a little bit of fun here. Not that we haven't had fun before.
I know. I was already having a great time.
But we have a little segment here sponsored by Kyle Lehman at Wintrust Mortgage. And what we call this is the wheel of old man strength. So I'm going to bring up this little spinner wheel. It's randomly going to choose a target and a topic. And then that will give you enough time through the commercial to think of this topic and give an answer. So just so you know, the categories are any public speaking disaster that you may have had, an awkward celebrity encounter, your worst text fail, an embarrassing childhood nickname, an epic fall or trip, the most cringe outfit you've ever wore, any social media slip up, name mix-up mishap, an awkward first date, or an accidentally if you've ever replied all. So we're going to hit this wheel. It'll land on something, and then we'll play the commercial. And when you come back, you can answer this wheel of death, what we call it.
Oh, yeah. I'm ready.
It's the wheel of misfortune.
That's right. Okay, accidental reply all. Now, you don't have to use that verbatim, but some embarrassing accidental reply all. So let's get a word from Kyle Lehman. We'll come back. We'll get Mike's answer.
Whether you're buying, selling, or refinancing your home, or if it's simply time to renovate the one you're already living in, you need an experienced mortgage professional to help you analyze your financing options and to make sure the closing goes smoothly. And that's exactly what you get when you call Kyle Lehman at Wintrust Mortgage. Kyle's experience and expertise, coupled with Wintrust's rates and programs, ensures you'll get the mortgage that's right for you. You may even qualify for down payment assistance. Before you reach out to a realtor, call Kyle and get pre-qualified, empowering you to start shopping for the home of your dreams. Call Kyle at 515-473-0546. Kyle Lehman, Wintrust Mortgage, 515-473-0546.
All right. Mike, you landed on accidental reply all.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the most like memorable for me email mishap was when, like, in college, going like all the way back, I was the president of my fraternity, and like one of the fraternity members was like Peter Silberman, and I can't remember exactly his email address. But then one of my professors who taught like papal history, and he was like 75, his last name was Peters. And so I accidentally like swapped their emails in an email to my fraternity about like a party that we were going to have and like who was going to do what for the party. And so I broke down like the categories of who was in charge of one, and like alcohol was on there, which you can imagine. But then one paragraph was called drugs. And it went through like who was going to get the tank of nitrous, when to pick it up, when the place on South Philly did it, what you say when you go buy it. We probably broke like 3 different federal laws in this one party for this one email. And I hit send. And then I was like looking at the list of members, because I think Pete was like, oh, I didn't get it. And I was like, well, you're on there. And I was like, oh, shit. And then you kind of like wait, and you're like, well, like, I don't think the guy can like get me in trouble in my class. And then the next day, like a reply came back from this like Professor Peters, and he just said, sounds like fun. It's like, he never brought it up in class or anything, But it was like, that was like one of those where you're like, you try to be way more conscious of like what email addresses are and where. I mean, there were a few of those. Like that was, I mean, you figure that's like 2003. So
Yeah.
I'd only really been using email for like 3 years at that point.
You didn't even have the autofill. Like that's
I know.
usually the trouble. I actually 2 weeks ago was working on a core value documentation for the company that I work for. And me and two other people were working on it, and we had to send the final draft to our 4 partners of the company. And so nobody had seen them except for the 3 people that were working on them. So I sent an email to Sean, Marcus, Mike, and Ryan, and accidentally typed in Ryan from Raygun and sent that email with the core values on it 2 weeks ago. And didn't realize it until 2 reply alls when he finally emailed back, and he goes, "I'm not so sure I'm supposed to be on this."
Yeah.
And I had a panic because I was like,
they're really giving us all the background for
that's
their
right. That's not
project.
great. That's not great. So yeah, right. So it happens everywhere. Okay.
I did have one more question I wanted to ask.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh yeah.
Which kind of follows up to the wheel was new. That's the first time we've done that, and previously we'd done the question of the pod, so I'm kind of going back to that a little bit. When you talked about selling on street corners and doing all that in major cities and college campuses and everything else, is there a story where you got hassled by the police, got run off, got anything exciting or fun that ever happened to you during one of those?
I mean, yeah, there's kind of a bunch of, the most exciting one that's, kind of, it's not like getting hassled. I mean, it is one of those things of, I don't know. I'm like one of those people that's been allowed to get away with all sorts of stuff. So one time, like the police came up to me and they're like, "Oh, you're not supposed to be selling here." And I was like, "I'm just giving these away." And they're like, "Giving them away?" I was like, "You guys can have some." They're like, "Okay, all right, give us some." And then they like walked on. I was like, but I'd usually be like, "I'm from Iowa." I was selling like Jon Stewart for President t-shirts, and like I'm like right below TRL, like Total Request Live, when that was on MTV and people would gather around outside. And this woman comes up and she's like, "Oh my God, my boss would love these Jon Stewart for President t-shirts." And I was like, "Oh, who's your boss?" And she's like, "Jon Stewart." I was like, "Oh, crazy." And she's like, "Do you want to come to like a taping of the show later?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And she's like, "All right, well, it's 3 p.m. Here's the address." So I was like, "Awesome." So I went up to the address. I like stood there. I was giving like Jon Stewart for President shirts away to people who were waiting like in the audience. And then like the producer came out and she's like, "Yeah, come on, we only got you a seat." And so I sat like right off stage, like while they were like, while they're filming it, like if you've ever like watched a live taping of a show, like the studios are tiny. And so I'm sitting in like a folding chair, like just off to the side. And like Stephen Colbert, who was still on the show back then, this is before the Colbert Report, like sat down next to me. And then he stood up and like did his little spot in front of the green screen and then walked away. And you just like, this was back when I watched The Daily Show like twice a day. Like I'd watch it in the evening and I'd watch the rerun the next day. And so Jon Stewart was just like this larger than life figure. And the show is over. They're done taping. And then one of the people comes over and they're like, "Yeah, Jon wants to come over and say hi to you." And I was like, "Wow, that's crazy." And so Jon Stewart walks over and I'm still standing by the folding chair. And I think because it was like Jon Stewart President shirts. And I think this was like late summer of 2004. So it's only a couple of months before the election. And he was like, "Yeah, I don't know if we have enough time to pull this thing off." And we said something else. I think I gave him my business card. He laughed at my title was sales czar. And he was like the nicest dude in the world. Like everyone on the show was so friendly. And they invited me back to watch like the live election coverage a few weeks later or whatever. And it's just, it's one of those things, if you remember, just to treat everybody with like courtesy. Because if you're Jon Stewart, you could have been like, "Yeah, hey, fucking beat it. Stop using my name on a t-shirt." Or could have sent out a cease and desist letter. When you realize like, oh, this dude kind of got it. He knew like the groundswell of enthusiasm. I wasn't hurting anybody. You're only like helping yourself. And that's a story, I've told so many times over the years. And I've always kind of kept that in the back of my mind of, even if you're only friendly to people out of your own self-interest, it's like you'll get a lot more mileage, or at least the mileage you want, being nicer to people than being like a total dickhead. And like Jon Stewart being like a great person when I met him, like it didn't do anything for me. It's not like I sold a bunch of t-shirts because of him or anything. It was just wild that that's how it happened. But it was one of those things, if you start to realize, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. Like, I was only in that position because I sat there selling Jon Stewart for President t-shirts like day in and day out for like weeks. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And you start to realize that the stuff happens to people who are putting themselves in a position for stuff to happen to. Gerald Ford was the guy who was like, the harder you work, the luckier you are. And I've worked like hell.
Perfect. Okay, our final segment is a semi-sponsored segment, but we asked for donations to the Young Women's Resource Center. So years ago, when this pod was very in its infancy, we had a guest on the pod called Steph Copley, and she kindly told Tim, the previous host, and myself to shut the fuck up so she could get her point across. And we thought it was so funny that we decided to make it a sponsored segment. So in that, we're asking people to donate to the Young Women's Resource Center in honor of this segment. And then when we come back, Mike, Aaron and I have to shut the fuck up, and you have carte blanche to say whatever you want on any topic. Nothing's off limits.
I've been doing that the whole time.
Well, but we're not allowed to push back. We're not allowed to push back. So
nope, this is a no question, no nothing.
So let's get a word from Steph Copley about the Young Women's Resource Center and the good that they do, and then we'll come back with Mike Draper.
Hey everybody, it's Steph Copley, the woman behind the STFU segment on the Old Man Strength podcast. When I told the guys I wanted to sponsor this segment, they recommended that I make a charitable donation instead, so that's what I did. I chose the Young Women's Resource Center in Des Moines, Iowa. They're a nonprofit that supports, educates, and advocates for girls and young women ages 10 to 24. Their whole goal is to make sure that these young women become strong, self-confident, and successful. And if you know me at all, you know that aligns with my goals as well. If you're interested and would like to donate, check them out at ywrc.org and donate today. And remember, don't forget to STFU and listen every once in a while. Thanks.
All right. Mike, the floor is yours.
Yeah, to talk about whatever I want to talk about. I mean, I guess, now that we're on like the thread of like health, I suppose we were talking about at the beginning. It's something I was like thinking about recently. I don't know. I've thought about a lot, where it's always one of those things of how like obvious stuff is. But I love the headlines of like this like new thing, this new thing, this new thing. And you're like, why not just like water vegetables and walk around the block? Like, not be a fucking vegetarian by any stretch. I had a friend who was like, I don't know, I'm like getting old. I'm like almost 50. It's like my joints are hurting. I don't feel so great. I'm like tired. Like, I don't know if it's like, who knows what it is. And I was like, hey man, I don't want to normally give unsolicited advice, but since you brought it up, it's like, 1, you drink too much. Alcohol is an inflammatory. No shit, your joints are going to hurt. You'll sleep worse. It's like, 2, you eat like no vegetables. Your gut health has got to be like garbage. It's like, just eat vegetables. Like, not become a vegetarian. Just eat some broccoli with your bebops. Like, any variety you can throw in. 3, swap all fluids with just like water, tea, or coffee. Mostly just water. 4, don't like join a gym. That's not going to do anything for you. It's like, just start walking around the block. Just get up, move around. It's like those 4 things. It's like, I just saved you thousands of dollars a year and you will feel so much better. I mean, it blows my fucking mind how much better I feel at like 40 than I did at like 25, because I just like ate and consumed garbage at 25. I mean, from like alcohol. I mean, I was beyond like doing drugs. I was just like, you can only do that when you're an Ivy League student, which shows you how easy college is. You're like, I had a 4.0 on my major. And I was like fucking high half the time. I can't run a store like that, but just like drank too much, ate shit. Now it's like water, fiber, tea, drink occasionally. But it really is. It's like, God, the answer is like right in front of everybody. It's so wild that people focus on like supplements of like, oh, this one little thing And you're like, what's so important for that? Well, you ingest it. It matters what you put in your body, and this thing's gonna unlock. And you're like, that's so small. And then this giant tub of green, sparkly, carbonated crap is being guzzled. And you're like, well, what's that do? You're like, it's diet. It's like, what? It's like, just go by the volume of what you are ingesting. It's like, no, stop. And you want to just like shake people. You're like, no, everyone, like, just take a step back. It's not one of these, like, there is no scam to it. There's no special diet to it. It's not like keto. It's whatever. But just everything, like, that you learned when you were like little, just apply it before. Just like move around, drink water, eat vegetables. God, you will feel so much better. And until you do, shut the fuck up. See, I even worked this segment into it. But it's people who are like, I'm tired, I don't feel good. It's like, what are you eating? Garbage? That's like, well, I went out drinking. You're like, well, that's literally poisoning your body. And again, it's like, I'll drink sometimes. I'm not like I'm not even one of these people, but it's like, it poisons your body. And people are like, but I like the poison. I'm like, well, there you go. Like, everybody does. Like, if I ever have like a pint of beer, you're like, God, beer is fucking awesome. Weed also, like, all of it. But they slow your body down. I mean, it depends on what you want out of life. And it's like, there is no way to have it all. It's like, there is no way to like drink and eat like shit and feel great. So you're going to have to pick a lane. If you want to feel good, you have to eat and drink good. If you don't feel good and you're eating and drinking like shit, maybe I don't give a fuck.
As I said at the beginning of the podcast,
and get that fiber count up.
That's right. I'm starting this workout this week, and I've stumbled upon this TikTok algorithm where people talk about this carnivore diet where all they eat is meat and eggs. And I'm like,
which is insane.
That sounds
it's like those
terrible.
People are like, oh my God, yeah.
That sounds terrible. So
yeah, it's like you don't even put dogs on that diet.
No.
Those are the kinds of things where you're like, God, people like that. I mean, it's like vegans are annoying, ultra meat people, like anybody that takes stuff to the extreme is like so hard to listen to. And that's why I always say like, oh, I'm not saying be a vegetarian. It's like, I love pork. But it's that idea of like, it's balancing stuff out. And usually these people with some like secret side door, you never thought of it type of thing, they're just selling stuff. It is the reason why the vegetable water and walk around plan is hard is because there's no money in it for anybody except whoever grows the vegetables. It's like water is free. Walking
or the
is
guy
free.
that prints the t-shirt.
Yeah, there you go. Now we're getting it's like which is who everyone should be thinking about. But what's in it for Mike Draper? It's like, so
put it on the front of
everyone,
the t-shirt. Water.
Yeah.
Walk around. Vegetables.
Drink more water and think about what you can do for Mike Draper.
Perfect. All right, Mike. Well, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on. It's been a lot of fun talking to you and learning about your story. So.
WWVD.
Yeah.
Walk around vegetables do.
Yeah. Now we're getting somewhere.
There you go.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's been great. We hope you guys
you still got, I don't know what time you go to bed, Chris, but you still got a little while to get that 9 milligrams of fiber or 9 grams.
I'll go eat I'll eat some fiber gummies or something up there. I don't know. I'll get it in.
Go
I'll drink a smoothie.
Seeds and chew on a tree.
Go chew on a tree. That'll work. As always, this has been Old Man Strength. Thank you guys so much for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe to all those podcasts on the Three Beards Media Network. We have a huge week this week. Bill and Willie Farrell are back with their workshop podcast on Tuesday. Three Blind Refs, Side of the Storm on Wednesday night, Hawk's Eye View on Thursday. It's a full slate. Ball Don't Lie finishes up the week. With that, I'm Chris. That was Aaron. Mike, thanks so much. We are out of here. All right.